Welcome into a post-draft edition of the Install with Greg Cosell. We're excited to have you guys back. Excited to talk about a lot of these players, and even more excited, Greg, to have a draft class for the Titans to be able to break down at the live show. 2 weeks, my guy. It's coming up fast at the Hutton Hotel, and we're so excited to get out there with the audience and talk about all these Titans picks.
No, I'm really looking forward to that. Love the draft. I mean, obviously, as you know, Buck, the only way I can talk about players is based on my evaluation. But sometimes it's a good evaluation. Sometimes, hey, I'm not sure a player is going to be a great pro, but that's okay. We'll see how it goes. We'll have some fun.
Certainly, we will have a lot of fun, and we've got a fascinating draft class to break down with the audience. Particularly with the quarterback that the Titans added in the second round.
I was very happy about that. There's something about the quarterback position in the NFL that gets people a little excited.
Greg, I love Peter Skoronski, but I'm not going to lie to you. I was like, all right, if we're not going to do the quarterback in the first round, please let me get something interesting in the second. But they delivered. So we will certainly have an interesting time talking about the team building philosophy elements of it.
Yep.
And of course the picks themselves, but the division is fascinating, and that's what we're going to do today. We knew that the AFC South was going to be heavily involved, of course, at the top of the order with the quarterbacks. And Greg, I'd like to start with Indianapolis, I think, first, if we could. Adding Anthony Richardson to that offense, 4th overall after C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson go 2 and 3. We'll talk about the Texans momentarily. But whether you want to consider it a risk, whether you want to talk about the opportunity that Indianapolis has with Richardson, what do you like? What are you most curious about the fit of the player in that situation?
Well, it's really funny because obviously I evaluated all these players before the draft. Buck, you know that. I that's what I do. I have no idea who's going to draft them. Now, as I evaluate players, particularly quarterbacks, I tend to think in terms of what kind of offense would they work best in, particularly early in their careers. Because obviously, no matter how much a quarterback has great traits and other things that are positive, like a Bryce Young, it's still an adjustment and a transition. There's still a projection involved. So think of it this way: we know who the head coach now of the Indianapolis Colts is, right? Shane Steichen. Where did he come from? He came from the Eagles. Here's what I typed as my last line in my transition for Richardson, okay? Not knowing this. I did Richardson 2 months ago. I said I could see Richardson early in his career working in an offense similar to the Eagles offense with Jalen Hurts, with multiple run game concepts that start with the quarterback, and a pass game that works off the run game with defined reads and throws, given the greater predictability of defensive alignments and coverages. So I saw Richardson having his best opportunity to be successful early in that style of offense, and that's exactly the offense he's going to be in. And you know what? He's going to start week 1.
It certainly seems that way based on Jim Irsay's comments. And the opportunity that they'll have. And like you said, with Shane Steichen and the Eagles, Greg, the most fascinating thing about the way that Jalen Hurts developed is the way that they were able to tailor that offense and kind of progressively improve it as Hurts was able to operate and do more, right? They made the playoffs the year that they were one and done, and they ran into Tom Brady, but still it was the best rushing offense in football that year. They found ways to utilize Jalen Hurts to the best of his abilities, and then he became more refined as a passer, and you saw them develop a more involved passing game that he was able to work through and really maximize. Of course, the talent around him was great, and they were operating on a cheap rookie deal at the time, but still, like, exactly what you've described, I think we can all envision it. It's as good a landing spot as somebody like Richardson, I felt like, could have.
Yeah, and I think one thing that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of is when your quarterback can run, obviously during the season, there was a lot of talk with the Eagles that, a lot of guys could run the Eagles offense. It wasn't Jalen Hurts. You saw all that, and that's so wrong, because it all starts with the fact that the quarterback has a major significant running element to his game. And the reason why that's important is not just for the obvious, wow, he's a great runner, but it's what it does to the defense in terms of how they align and how they have to account for gaps, because the quarterback is now a runner. So very often, almost all the time, a safety now has to be in a different position than he might be if it was just a more conventional offense with a great run game. Look, when Gardner Minshew played, the Eagles still had a really good run game. It was far more conventional. But when you have a quarterback that can run, it changes how the defense has to align and play. And that's the fact. That's why these offenses are really built on the quarterback. That's why the Eagles offense is built on Jalen Hurts. It's not that people think because it looks so efficient that, oh, anybody could run it. That's not true. And Richardson he won't be as advanced as Jalen was this year in the passing game, clearly, but the run game element will be there.
Yeah, that I think is, the question, of course, about Richardson, and we see more prospect. I don't want to say we see more prospects like this because we've not athletically seen anything like Anthony Richardson in NFL,
right.
Testing history. That's not something that's ever really been out there before. But his main area or need to improve is the accuracy, correct? Like his consistency and his accuracy at the quarterback position. It's such a small sample size, Greg. Him 12 games at Florida. He didn't play in the bowl game. And so to see how they kind of bring that along, of course, there's no, they have different ways. I'm not a football coach. You are somebody who studies this stuff at a much more granular level, and still, like, how they coach him to improve his accuracy is going to be interesting to watch, and the steps that they can take, footwork and otherwise, to start to refine those characteristics.
Yeah, that's going to be critical because in this league, you can't miss routine throws. And the nature of that offense with the run game element, as I mentioned, it'll start with him in the run game. Because think of it this way. Every team pretty much plays with a safety in the box when you play a run game with a quarterback who can run. But the free safety also has to be involved in the run game. He's the extra quarterback player, and he almost always lines up to the side of the back. So now that free safety is not truly a deep player in a strict sense. He becomes that if it's a pass play, but he doesn't really start there. So with Richardson, what you're going to get is, by NFL standards, relatively speaking, it becomes easier in terms of what he's seeing. Now, you can't miss the layups. He missed too many layups in college, and he didn't play a lot of football, but there's a lot of talk about his lower body mechanics, and there's no question about that. His footwork needs to be better. Too often his feet were either too wide or too close together. He didn't really throw with a firm base. When he did, it was beautiful. I mean, it's there. It's there in his body, Buck. We know that. It's there. It's just a question of, can he do it all the time?
Yeah, I'm excited. I don't think Titans fans are excited to watch if it pans out, but I'm certainly fascinated to see just generally this division, Greg. I mean, we may not have enough time to get through all three of them today. In fact, because I think there's a couple of interesting Colts
there's a lot
draft picks, and certainly the Texans had quite a variety of talent that they were able to add. But just the makeover that this division has undergone at the quarterback position in the last 2 years, I think it becomes immediately one of the most interesting divisions in football.
I mean, let's assume for the moment that all four quarterbacks, again, we're not going to sit here and say they're all going to be stars. We don't know that. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence looks like he's going to be a really, really good player. But, as you look ahead, a year, 2 years, 3 years, you have a division with Lawrence, Richardson, Stroud, and Levis. I mean, that's pretty interesting.
No, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Now, just sticking with the Colts for a moment, I love Julius Brents, the Kansas State corner. I think that what they are trying to do there defensively, he makes so much sense for, and somebody who I thought, Greg, I'd be curious to hear your evaluation. We didn't talk about him in the pre-draft process. But somebody who just, in terms of technique, it seems like took the biggest step forward in 2022 when you watched his tape.
Yeah, you're talking about a guy that is 6'3" with 34-inch arms, which is absurd for a corner. So you're dealing with a desirable combination of size, length, plus athletic movement, very, very competitive, extensive experience playing both man and zone coverage. He can play mirror match press man. He can play physical press man. He also played a good percentage of zone coverage. And I thought he was one of the few corners that I watched, and I did not see every one, so I don't want people to think I watched 50 corners, but I watched an awful lot. I thought he showed a strong feel for route concepts and combinations in zone coverage. And you don't see that very often with college corners. So, you're dealing with a guy, look, most 6'3" guys are not what we would describe as sudden or twitchy or explosive, but 6'3" corners rarely fit that athletic profile. But he's smooth, he's fluid. I thought he had really good traits. I was not surprised he went in the second round.
I think there's a lot of wide receiver envy in Tennessee after just generally, but after this draft in particular, which Greg, again, this is another reason to come to the live taping because we got to talk about the wide receiver situation down here. It remains unique is how I will describe it.
Good word. Good word.
I
like it.
Because I saw, Josh Downs is somebody who I've really enjoyed. Obviously, his college tape at Carolina, he was a really, really fun player. With a lot of exciting traits. He goes to Indianapolis, where I think they're going to be able to use him in a really fun way, especially with Shane Steichen in that offense. And they lose a couple of pieces, and Paris Campbell goes to the Giants, but still Michael Pittman, I think, and the tight ends that they have there. Indy shapes up to be a really unique collection of skill position players, and I thought Downs was a nice addition to that.
Well, and it's also he's different because they have Pittman and Pierce, and now you have Downs who's different. When they've got the big tight ends, the Johnny Woods. I mean, so now you've got a twitchy, explosive slot type receiver. I mean, this guy has dynamic route quickness. He's sudden. He's shifty. He's a run after catch guy. He can accelerate. I mean, he's a space guy. You'll see him in motion. He's a really good prospect. Does he possess the size you exactly want? No, but he fits today's NFL passing game. You can move him. He's a motion guy. He's a fun watch. I mean, I think he's, as I said, I think in that style of offense, he fits extremely well.
On the defensive side of the ball, and I'm gonna butcher. I don't want to do a disservice to Adebaware.
You're talking about the Northwestern kid?
Yes. So I'll stick to the last name, Adebaware. That's the only one that I felt confident saying. I was surprised to see him fall that far, Greg, but I really, really liked watching some of him. Going back and checking out some of Peter Skoronski's tape here in Tennessee. You go and have the opportunity to go back and look at the defensive side of the ball, and that was a player that I really enjoyed watching throughout the process.
He's an interesting guy, Buck, because he's got unbelievable physical and athletic traits. He just is not as good as his traits at this moment. And I think that's why he lasted. But I mean, when you talk about that 40 time that he ran at the combine, when you talk about the vertical jump, the short shuttle time is off the charts at 4.05. He played outside and inside at Northwestern. He's got really good arm length. He's got burst and suddenness to his movement. He's got strong, powerful hands. The traits are all there. They're in his body. You see it on tape on occasion. You don't see it quite enough. I guess the best way to describe it is what I said. He's not as good a player snap after snap as his traits are. And that's why he got drafted where he did. But the goal, of course, is because he has such good traits, and he's got great confined space force and strength. He's got really strong, heavy hands. He's got sudden movement. He's got so many things you love. But so there's so much to work with and cultivate. It just needs to come out more, but it's clearly there within his body.
Yeah. Indianapolis, like I said, the entire division is going to be an interesting watch this year. But I think, Greg, we'll do Jacksonville today and maybe save Houston for another episode because there's a lot to dive into. And the Jags obviously winning the division last year. Trevor Lawrence taking a significant step, but still showing, room for improvement at times. Yeah. When the Jags kind of came into this offseason and you saw some of the steps that Trevor Lawrence was able to take this season with improved coaching and talent around him, what were you most interested in seeing Jacksonville add around him to further support what they're trying to do?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you always look to add skill position players, receivers, because they lost some. I think you'd probably want to add a tight end because Evan Ingram, I believe, didn't he just sign a 1-year deal, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes. So they tagged him, and he had been holding out of the early part of their voluntary stuff as he's looking for a longer term deal.
Yeah. So I think you want to do that. You always want to add offensive linemen. I mean, look, when you have a quarterback like Lawrence, okay, who clearly improved dramatically under the tutelage of Doug Peterson and that excellent staff, you're looking to make sure everything is in place, because as good as you think Lawrence can be, you don't want to get into a situation where every game is about Trevor Lawrence. It's very hard to play in the NFL when every game is about your quarterback. The Buffalo Bills have found that out. As good as Josh Allen is, every game can't be, if the quarterback doesn't play great, you can't win. Yeah, it can't be like that. I would have thought too that they would look to add. I mean, obviously, Travis Etienne had a really good season a year ago, and he's quote unquote their primary back. But I would look to add a back that brings a little more power to the program, which I believe they did. We'll get to that in a minute. Those are the kinds of things that I would think about from an offensive perspective.
Yeah, let's start with the running back, Tank Bigsby, because obviously they draft the Oklahoma tackle Anton Harrison in the first round. Cam Robinson, their left tackle, is going to be suspended at this point. Last I saw, it was an indefinite suspension. I had not seen a timeline for him as of yet. But with Tank Bigsby, Greg, because the Titans happen to take a running back around that time too, in Tajay Spears, who we'll talk about at the live show. And Bigsby was around in that area. What do you like about what he brings as that complement to ETN?
Yeah, Bigsby came out of Georgia as a 5-star recruit and a top 5 running back prospect in the nation. And then he went to Auburn. Now, this is a kid that has, I mean, the way I would describe him, he's decisive, he's determined, he runs with velocity downhill, he's a sustainer, he's got explosive short area burst, he's got power. This guy gets hard yards, he's got strong finishing traits, and he's got just enough juice that if he can clear that second level, he can run a little bit. He's got really good body control. He's got flexibility. He's got balance. He can maintain that velocity and power when making quick, decisive cuts. I really like Bigsby. I saw him last summer with his 2021 tape, and I really liked him a lot. Now, Auburn's offense, as you know, this year, you're in SEC country. It obviously was not what they hoped it would be, and it didn't quite work out from a numbers perspective for Tank Bigsby. But I think he's a really, really talented, tough, physical runner.
Yeah. One of the players that I really enjoyed watching, you mentioned SEC country, Ventrell Miller, the linebacker from Florida, to bolster their inside linebacker depth. And, he looks like he probably ends up being a special teams player to start, Greg, as they already have similar players like Shaq Quarterman, who was certainly a big part of the 2022, the ending to the 2022 season, who was the player who forced the fumble on Derrick Henry to spark a Jags victory for the first time in Nashville since 2013. He was a big part of their defense, but Ventrell Miller in particular was somebody who I recognized from SEC play down here and really liked to fit there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, he's a smaller linebacker. He's got pretty good quickness. Just trying to remember a lot of seeing him. I think that you're dealing with a guy that was good at shooting gaps, good at seeing things quickly, a key and diagnose guy, just the size. Some don't mind smaller linebackers in today's NFL. Did have a little bit of a sideline to sideline element to him. I think he fits how they want to play. But I think you're right. My guess is early in his career, he's probably more of a special teams player than a starting stack backer.
Yeah, with Jacksonville, Greg, they looking back at those games towards the end of the season, obviously, like Trevor Lawrence had the rough start in the playoff game against the Chargers, was able to rally back, and obviously Los Angeles having some problems of their own, and in the way that they were able to manage and secure turnovers early on in that game, but still allow the Jags to get back into that. The thing that I'm fascinated to see with Jacksonville is how much better they can be with Lawrence at this point, because while I feel like I feel much more confident about that, and we talk about this in the draft process all the time, there's no such thing as a sure thing, or a generational prospect is something that gets tossed out too much. Like I feel so much more confident in Trevor Lawrence while still not necessarily knowing if he's on the tier where my mind wants to put him based on how talented I know him to be.
Yeah, and he improved dramatically last year. They made the playoffs. They won that game. I think he's clearly an improved player. I think they did a terrific job with him. There were certain things that needed to be cleaned up. He needed to become quicker in everything he did. He was too deliberate. He needed to shorten his stride as a thrower, because one of the things that stood out at Clemson, and you had to really dig deep and watch a lot of tape, which you know I do, Buck, is he was a big strider as a thrower. And at Clemson, he was not under a lot of duress. It's Clemson, so he was not under a lot of duress. He threw a ton of screens as well at Clemson, which obviously that's not the way to evaluate a quarterback, by looking at screens. So they need to speed him up. And they did that. And as the season progressed, he just looked quicker in his drop and his set. And he didn't stride as much when he delivered the football, because he had a tendency, when there, as I said, you had to dig at Clemson, when there were people around him, because he was a big strider, he would hurry himself, and he started to get a little wild high. And you had to get rid of that. And they did get rid of it. So I think he's a really good player, and ascending player, and improving player. I'm not one of those people, as you know, Buck, that's going to sit here and say, man, this guy is he's top 3 right now. No question. Let us have him play another year. I doubt he's going to go backwards, but let's wait and see where he goes. But I think he's an ascending, improving player right now.
Certainly going to be a lot of fun in the AFC South, and looking forward to talking about what the Houston Texans did with a lot of draft capital to work with and a lot of young talent that they added. Greg, the live show coming up on May the 20th, 1045thezone.com is where people can get tickets, and looking forward to getting a little bit closer, buddy, and having this party with the audience and breaking down some tape and talking shop. It's going to be a great time.
Can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it, Buck.
Thanks as always.